biggest mistake retailers are making with their stores today isn't about product, price, or even location. It's that they've been designing those stores for the act of shopping rather than simply being human. So today we're going to dig into why stores today should have less to do with transactions and much more to do with making people feel welcome. And speaking of feeling welcome, welcome to Retail OCD. We're three seasoned experts who spent our careers inside of retail, and we're still obsessed with it. So I'm Deanne Campbell, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Josh Rockoff and Barney Stacher. So Barney, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Welcome, Tyler Winograd, the studio director of retail and consumer experiences with Gensler. Gensler is really renowned for the most engaging and innovative retail design. So welcome, Tyler.
Thank you. Very nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. This is a fun one for me because we met at a Chamber of Commerce, Manhattan Chamber of Commerce event, and I found through your presentation there that you and I shared a background in hospitality. I've worked with Hyatt early in my career before moving to retail, but what I internalized there, the core values of hospitality, inform everything that I do, and I think that that's something we both share. And so, the first question about this, besides telling us a little bit about your background with Union Square Hospitality Group and how you came to Gensler, I think you've been there for some 6 years. What have you learned? What does hospitality already know about the physical space that retail still hasn't figured out yet?
Yeah, quite a few questions there that I'll try to address in some version of a long and winded background. But, my path to get to my current role is very unique and fairly atypical and certainly a windy one, which is that I worked in marketing right out of school. For a small little marketing agency that worked with the American lamb industry, actually the meat product. And so these boards exist in the US. If you think about like the ad campaigns, Got Milk, that is from that industry board that is in charge of marketing for all those farmers. And when I was looking for jobs right out of school, I was sort of looking across marketing and advertising and PR, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I found this job, and what it was really thinking about experiential marketing and social marketing on behalf of this industry. And the way in which we did that was through partnership with restaurants in key markets and events. I remember when I read the job description, I said, well, wait a minute. I actually love food and cooking and know a lot about it because my parents met in a restaurant. My dad is still in the restaurant industry today in Chicago. And so I grew up in restaurants, around restaurants, obsessed with cooking and food. It's sort of the thing that my family does. And so it was a moment where I said, well, maybe there's an option here to turn this into a career, outside of working in an actual restaurant. And so that's how I got into marketing, frankly, and then therefore hospitality. And so I did that for a couple of years and then eventually came to New York and started working, like you said, for Union Square Hospitality Company. Danny Meyer's, legendary or famed company here in New York, responsible for both some of our most beloved restaurants as well as Shake Shack. And so when I started that job, it was more squarely marketing, on behalf of these restaurants, whether it was social or experiential, again, through events and things like that. But by the time that I left that role or that job about 4.5 years later, our team was really responsible for developing brands for new concepts. And so we were developing brands both by way of traditional brand identity, logos, colors, collateral, the websites, etc., but also thinking about what does this new brand stand for? What is the value proposition? What are we trying to communicate to guests? And therefore, what does that mean for the built environment? What does that mean for how the restaurant should be designed, whether the materiality choices that you're making, how that restaurant is organized to conjure up a feeling or a particular experience? And that's where I really started to get interested in and excited about and gain experience around what a brand really means and the value of a brand, and then therefore how can that be translated into a physical experience that is aligned with your original goal and mission of creating this, this business or this brand in the first place. And so I loved that job. had a ton of fun. Obviously, the content of which we were responsible for, these beloved restaurants, and working with Danny was amazing. But I got to the point where I recognized that I'd been on the client side, this whole time, working with other agencies, whether it be a brand agency, a design agency, an architecture firm, to help partner with us to bring these visions to life. And we did some of that design work in-house, but for the most part, we were hiring agencies to help us. And so I'd been in that role for a while and said, I really want to be on the other side of this equation. I want to be on the creative side, on the design side, and see what that's like. So when I first started looking for jobs, I was looking at branding agencies because really that was like squarely my expertise and what I was interested in. Gensler was not on my radar. And I was sort of, leveraging my network of people that we had worked with. And I came across a job description on LinkedIn for what Gensler calls a brand design manager. And Gensler, started as an interior design firm. And over the years, we've evolved to really be a design firm in that we focus on interior design, architecture, brand design, digital design, and sort of everything in between. And when I read the description, it almost told me what I was already doing. It articulated my role and my focus and my passion better than I could.
Oh, that's me. That's the role I have.
Exactly. Sort of the light bulb moment of, this focus is where brand intersects with the physical environment. Absolutely. And so, long story short, I applied for that job and got that job. And now, like you said, here I am 6.5 years later, leading our retail and consumer experience studio in the New York office, as well as that practice for the region. If we can get into further, but if you told me at any point, at certain points along my journey in the last 13, 14 years that this would be my role, I probably would have said you're crazy.
Right.
But when I do look backwards on my path, I think there actually is a very clear through line, like you said, from hospitality to marketing to hospitality again to design and retail. I really do see that all as very interrelated, if not oftentimes the same thing. And so I think that path has given me the perspective I have on this industry and our practice and where it's going. But as I stated at the beginning, it's certainly a tip.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. Retail, I believe retail, and I think we're all sort of coming back to the idea that retail is hospitality, hospitality is retail, and we shouldn't disassociate them, and humans are needed in that mix and every touch point.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny, you said retail is hospitality and hospitality is retail, and I think if we want to really dissect that, those are just labels of industries.
Right.
But they're the same thing in actuality, in the sense that these are spaces where a business is trying to accomplish a goal and convey a message and articulate or design an experience for people. And at the end of the day, the only way that works is if people feel good in that experience, in that space, whether it's categorically retail and that it's the transaction of goods of some nature or services potentially, or it's hospitality, where it's the transaction of food and beverages. But the middle of that Venn diagram is very large if it isn't just a circle, in that people want to have a great experience and feel good and create memories and have an emotional connection to it so they come back.
Well, you said the word experience there twice, and then that leads me to the next thing, which is really what it is. It's not hospitality, it's not retail, it's experience. And we think about what that means to drive revenue. There's a cost to creating an experience, and and I'm going to take a little bit of a sidebar, give you a thesis that all the move into digital, and this will be a point for Josh, lowered the bar, the expectation for retailers and what they needed to provide the consumer in a retail experience for a number of years, and thus a lot of failures in consumer interaction, in engagement. So can you speak to, whether it's Josh and you, Deanne, about, how did this great flow of digital commerce bring down expectations for retail consumers or retailers, and then have to, now we're recovering from that?
It's funny. Digital commerce has no doubt had an immense effect on the retail and hospitality industry. I think no one's arguing that. I actually have the exact opposite perspective. which is that digital commerce has increased or elevated people's expectations because of the experience they have purchasing products online. Where we failed was, I think, retailers and business owners lowered their expectations of the own offerings that they had to provide to consumers.
That's what I meant, is that consumers' expectations were still always there.
That's right. And
but
so
that
I think
retailers said, yeah, digital's working this way without the kind of engagement and we're losing touch with that now.
That's right. I mean, I think a few things happened, but as e-commerce took off and more people became accustomed to or interested in purchasing products online, brands either thought, okay, we don't need physical stores anymore. We can just survive as an online business, which is possible for some businesses and brands, but ultimately it caps your brand in one way or another. Whether or not it's sales, it can be in other ways with brand equity and presence, loyalty, people feeling like you're actually changing and evolving with them. Mm-hmm. Or I think it allowed businesses to say, we can just offer the bare minimum experience in person because we're already thriving online. Who cares about our stores? It's just a real estate play at this point, or we're just doing it to check a box and it's status quo. Right. And I think what I would argue is that the opposite has happened in terms of consumer expectations being elevated because of the nuance of digital shopping. You know, an example that I like to use is Uber. Uber completely changed consumers' expectations for things like transparency and wait times. Right. Once we started using the Uber app, we realized that it's possible to know exactly how long something's going to take, exactly how far away it is, to have essentially control over when you're purchasing it, where you're purchasing it from, canceling that purchase in the middle of it and sort of rebooking. But it had this subconscious effect on consumers, or you could say society at large, where all of a sudden now you're in line for pizza and in the back of your head you're saying, why don't I know how long this is going to take? Where am I in line? Why is this taking more than 3 minutes? Right? And if you start to extrapolate that across lots of different experiences, think about the way in which you have transparency when you're shopping for clothing online. You know which sizes are available, which ones aren't, how long it's going to take, how long the shipping is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can get any information about that product fairly quickly, whether it's the materiality, where it was made. And so you go into a store now, and if something takes longer than a few minutes maximum to be in your hands, or they're out of a size, or the associate doesn't have the information that you're inquiring about, it feels like a really bad experience. Again, because your expectations have been set so high from digitally native shopping, essentially, where everything is at your fingertips. And so I think now we've come to this really interesting place where a few things are happening. Those in-person retail and hospitality experiences have to deliver on the same level of customer service and satisfaction as you can get with these instantaneous shopping experiences online. But even above that, they have to be nuanced and different than the online shopping experience. And I think that's where a lot of brands fail, is trying to replicate what you have online physically. And I think the consumers are too smart, or it's just natural to react to that and say, I don't need this. Why would I go buy this pair of socks in store, in person, if I can get it instantaneously on my phone? Right. There's no reason for me to be there. And so I think the best retail that we're seeing is different, right? It's offering products that are different, or an experience that is different. Otherwise, why exist outside of emergency convenience? I'm not saying that people want the same experience that they had online in person. They don't want that. No. Their expectations for customer experience and attention to their experience by that brand are now set by their experiences online. So when people go into Union Square Cafe, they expect that they know their name, that their Resi account is already recognized, that their credit card is on file. Yeah. That when, something interesting that we noticed was that the patience for getting your check at the restaurant went lower and lower and lower, because it was, people are used to instantaneously being able to check out. If you think Resi, I don't think they do it anymore, but Resi was piloting technology where, essentially your card was already on file. The table knows your name. The
Right.
bill is just paid. You don't have
One
to wait
tap
anymore. You
checkout.
just walk out. And I think that's a really analogous example to
Absolutely.
same thing as Amazon. I'm not waiting to pay. I'm just clicking. We're going out. And so
Well-
totally agree. The reason that people are doing things in person is because it has to be differentiated. It has to be a unique experience. It has to be hospitality laden and different from online, because again, to your point, why would I go? I can do all of that somewhere else. The through line is the customer service and the high level of attention to customers and their experiences, but the output is very different, right?
Output
So
is
it sounds
very
like
go ahead.
the in-store experience and the online experience for brand are not in competition anymore. There was a period of time when it felt like they
That's
were.
right.
But today they're not.
Well,
in
yeah.
competition. It's more of a yes and than
I think
instead
the
of.
shift occurred when it stopped being a novelty, right? Like, and that occurred probably in the mid 2000s,
Mhm.
right? Like 1998, 1999, 2000. You think about it, you could probably count on one hand how many shoe retailers were online, or how many eyeglass people were online, or how many home improvement stores were on. Like, you could do that. So it was a big novelty. It was like, oh my gosh, I can buy it online. Like, why do I have to go to the store? I can buy it on, and then all of a sudden it became a little bit more mainstream, right? And as it became more mainstream, you adapted to it. That novelty, to a degree, has worn off, and it now became an endless aisle.
I have a quick question for Tyler.
Thank you.
Before we
Yeah.
get off experience, because it's really relevant to what you were just talking about, Tyler. So based on what you said, the expectation of the conveniences of online, but also the importance of the personalization and the experience. How do you prioritize those experiences, those human experiences, and marry those up in a store with the practicalities and the ROI delivering things like returns and buy online, pick up in store, those functional things that are they could be considered experience killers. How do you balance those in a store without killing the experience and make those two things marry up in the same space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think stores today, and certainly of tomorrow, have to work far harder than stores ever have had to before. Throughout the history of retail, if you will, it was kind of a one note, right? Sell products, have as many products as you can in that store, and that's kind of it. And like Josh said, eventually, as e-commerce started to pick up, it had a couple of more jobs, whether it was buy online, pick up in store, trying to return something maybe that you bought online in that store. And then we find ourselves here today where stores are having to function as a store at its basis, a massive marketing investment and brand flag. It has to serve as some level of community hub, whether that's for the literal community around it or the community of those brand loyalists or people that associate themselves with that brand as part of their personality. It has to serve at some level of as an educator about that brand, about their products, about what they stand for. So you see things like event spaces being built into the flexibility of a store design. And so you have all of these different sort of jobs to be done that have a lot of nuance to them in terms of what that means for the physical environment, what that means for the operational model, what that means for, like you said, the overall sales model. How much product can we have in here? What type of space are we actually looking at leasing, right? That's changed a lot too. Where that space should be, how large it should be.
Is it consistent from location to location?
Yeah, exactly. And often not. And I think that goes back to this point that is part of what has to be differentiated from what that brand is offering online. There are all of these other services and experiences that can't quite happen online that are now needing to happen in the stores to kind of prove that investment, right? Yeah. If we're going to sign a 10-year lease and we're going to pay all of this money to design and build out a store, it's got to work really hard for us, because it could be easy enough to say, let's just skip that cost and let's skip that effort.
Right.
Well, there's a halo effect for a store that goes beyond sales per square foot. How do you help your clients calculate that? How do you help them understand that? It's a tenuous number. It's very difficult for some people to understand.
It's a design-led ROI, right?
That's right. I mean, there are lots of, I would say, newer or atypical, KPIs or ways to measure the impact of a store that are outside of just pure sales. something we worked on a project for Wayfair for their store outside of Chicago recently, and one of the interesting, or a couple of the interesting, metrics or statistics that have come out after that is that their purchases online have actually increased in the catchment area around the store post opening it, meaning it really did serve as that brand flag to introduce people to that brand, maybe remind them of that brand. And all of a sudden, because people can see it and it's kind of this big billboard next to the highway too, the interest in that brand and those purchases have come up. They also found that the percentage of new shoppers to the brand in store was far higher than the percentage, the average percentage of new shoppers on their website making their first purchase. Yeah. And so you find all these other ways
didn't they?
What was that?
The returns went down too, didn't they?
I think that may be true. And so there are all these other ways in which you can measure the success or the impact a store can have other than just those sales. You think about a lot of the stores in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue where the rents are some of the most expensive in the world. You just can't pencil that being a worthwhile investment purely on sales. So then you start to think about how are the other ways that this store might be elevating our brand, either by visibility or creating lifelong customers, selling other things than just a product, whether it's an experience or you think about a credit card. And so again, stores just have to do so much more today than they ever have before.
Right. The Louis Vuitton store on Madison that looks like a stack of suitcase. I mean, it's,
right.
How many times have we seen
millions of social posts and impressions out of that, probably more so than you could have ever gotten through an ad campaign.
Well, look at the Apple store, right? Here's a question for you, Tyler, that I've always wondered, right? So what happened during COVID? This was something that Danny Meyer faced, right? Like every restaurateur faced. How do you deliver that experience, that really important inside store plating, warm food experience to somebody who's literally picking it up and walking out the door with it?
So I wasn't there during that time. So I don't know that I'm necessarily qualified to answer that. I was already at Gensler, but I will say, I think COVID created an opportunity for the most inventive, most caring businesses from a hospitality or retail perspective to survive and innovate and reinvent themselves. You think about a lot of restaurants in Manhattan that turned their storefronts into these sort of, provision stores or grocery stores offering different versions of their dishes or products that were safe to take home or shelf stable. They started offering different types of experiences, again, for consumers that were safe at a certain time. And so I think it almost was like the great reckoning of back to the basics in terms of who has the highest quality product. Is your product really good? And is your customer service really good and thoughtful? And you might just have a chance at surviving. But if you were kind of status quo before COVID and just offering convenience essentially, or just products that you could get anywhere else, you were the first to go. It really exposed those weaknesses across hospitality and retail.
Right. I think that, one of the things that intrigues me is and Deanne, I think, because of your architecture background, the first store for like a digitally native brand, and that idea of like, okay, we've established ourselves with the consumer. How do we build our footprint out there and establish that experience? So, what's the big mistake that gets made in that, Tyler? And when they're trying to open their first one, because you've worked with some really interesting, both well-established brands, whether it's an Aero Mexico or a JP Morgan or a Claire's. Sorry.
Well, Claire's
They're on their way back.
They're on their way back. Sorry, my kids got thrown.
Was a great brand. I think Claire's is a great brand. You have a
Claire's
window.
Was that was their problem.
Go through it.
Okay, so they're coming back, but let's get back
Claire's
to that.
Is great. I'm a huge fan
of getting that first store.
I'm right there with you, DM.
But I'm curious about that too, because there have been a lot of direct-to-consumer brands over the years that have tried to foray into physical space, and they haven't done a great job. And then there have been a few that have actually made it.
I think this is a really good question, right? Can you do both well, right? Tyler, it's a really big question, right? It's what every company faces. Can you do both well? Which one do you focus on?
Well, and what is that first store? The importance of that first store.
Yeah.
Well, how do you get that first store right?
Yeah, it's obviously it's a hot topic as there are more and more digitally native brands, and I think an important one, which is that I think you can do both well. I think the key to doing both well is they have to be differentiated. Again, back to that original idea, there has to be a value proposition for that store to exist, a reason for consumers to believe and to go there that is different from your online platform. And I think with a lot of digitally native brands, people fall in love with the brand first online. They're first introduced to it. It's sort of like when you read a book and you're introduced to a character, and then you see the movie later, and you're kind of like, is that the picture that you had in your head? Right? So you fall in love with this brand online, and you have an idea of what that brand is, who they stand for, what they stand for, what type of person you should be if you're their consumer, what it means to be a fan of that brand. And so then that first physical output of that brand is so important because it's sort of like your second first impression. You had an opportunity for your first impression online, but it's such a different playing field in person that I think where brands get it wrong is they don't put enough thought and care into really taking a step back, looking in the mirror and asking, if not hard questions, important questions. Who are we? We know what our brand is online. Clearly you've had some success and now you're looking at a physical version of that. What does that mean in person? What does this brand look, feel, sound, smell like, operate like in person? Because again, online, it's just purely convenience. It's operational, it's sales, it's I want this thing, I bought it, great, I got it. Maybe there are opportunities for elevated customer experience in a special note in the package or special branding in the shipping, this, that, or the other. But there are so many other factors you have to start to consider when articulating an experience in person. We worked with a brand, Eric Emanuel. I don't know if that was one of the ones you mentioned.
I was going to ask you about that because I think that was done last year. Was that flagship?
Yep, that's on Green Street in Soho. And this is a brand wildly successful online. It's a men's fashion brand. Got very famous for these iconic shorts with the E logo, and they had devoted fans all over the world that were waiting for product drops online. Things were selling out. They had amazing collaborations. It was this very, clearly curated image of what the brand was, what it meant to buy those products, who bought those products, these sort of status symbols. And so when they were opening their first store, they took the time to ask those harder questions. We cannot just assume this will be successful by just putting our product that's been successful online in any old store. And even further, who are we? What is this brand actually going to look, feel, smell like in space? And so if you go to that store, I think it's an amazing translation of that brand it's based in this sort of lore of basketball and an affection for basketball and seeing fashion as art and these pieces of clothing as art. And then you go to the store and there's these amazing big, art moments with the basketball that's wedged up there and the hang bar that sort of looks like this futuristic tube that can call back to basketball as well. And then really thinking about what is the environment that our ideal customer would want to be in? What is the New York apartment or living room start to look and feel like of the Eric Emanuel as a brand? And so there are all of these interesting pieces like the carpeted room upstairs that start to communicate to those customers, this is what it means to buy this product, to sort of be in the know, be in this circle. Whereas they could have just said, hey, look, we've been really successful online. Let's just design an everyday store, put as much product as we can in there, and we'll call it a day. But they didn't. And I think because of that strategic thinking that they put into the design of the store before they did it, they still have lines around the block, every month.
Yeah. I'm going to give part because I'm like Mr. Metaphor or liken it to another experience. And the digital, I'm going to make a musical comparison.
Sure.
Right. So the digital recording, it's the same every time. I get it when I want it and I need it. And when I go to the show, that performance better live up, and it better be a community experience on some level and different points of engagement. And it better not just be a plain old merch table.
Right.
No. And so to me, that's what makes
totally
the Rolling Stones still touring out there.
That's my favorite band. So it's a good example. Wow. It's actually a really good analogy.
Yeah, thank you.
You can listen to a song at any given time, and it's easy. Yeah. It's essentially free. Not quite, and you might create some memories, right? I think we all have songs that we love.
Depends who you're with.
Remember smelling something, where you were at that time when you maybe first heard it, or you heard it recently. But to your point, going to see a concert involves other people, it involves hospitality, and it involves memories that are singular, in that it only sounded like that one time, or it was a little bit different, or I remember the people that I was with, to your point, what I was wearing, what it smelled like, what it felt like. And that is what happens, I think, when retail and hospitality are at their best, when that foresight has been taken into what is it that we want to communicate through this experience? What do we want the end result? A question we often ask our clients and ourselves in terms of our projects is, what's the best headline of the future before we ever start the project? What do we want someone to say about their experience in this space 3 years from now? Which is, I think, often a really interesting exercise, because you start to hear lots of different answers that, you want people to walk away saying it was the best store they've ever been into. Other people, maybe it's a little bit more specific. This was the most comfortable I've ever been. And I think that is how the most successful retail of today and tomorrow is coming to fruition, when it's not just about the product or the transaction, but it's taking a step back and thinking really strategically about, holistically, what are we trying to accomplish here, and who are we trying to accomplish it for? And then therefore, what are those people's expectations? What are they going to want when they're there?
You mentioned this brand has drops periodically, and that's a little bit of the scarcity mindset. And I think Nike was trying to do that as well. I know I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and they had the sneaker pop up. Well, they tried to do it as a permanent facility here in Atlanta. It failed because they built it more as a museum, and it didn't have any kind of dwell space in it like you've created here. And it was like a museum. You walk through it once and you don't want to go back for
you've seen it. There's not going to be a different
there's no place. Yeah, there's no place to sit. There's no place to be comfortable. There's no place to feel like you're part of the brand. And you've done exactly the opposite. Well, for Nike, it's to be used very infrequently, and it closed. They ended up putting up on the space.
Doesn't present that viral social moment like the Louis Vuitton store.
It gets back to something we've mentioned, which is that you have to offer something that is differentiated from your online platform to get people to believe that there is a reason to go. So these drops are products that either aren't available online ever, or they're available online after that initial drop, or there's scarcity. It's a limited number of products. And the benefit of it is you have people coming into your store. So they're either going to have a memorable experience that creates stronger loyalty than they would have online, or you have a bigger basket size, right? You go for this thing and then you end up seeing something else in person, where it's easier to make an impulse purchase than it might have been online, where it's just like, I found the thing, I'm not going to look at the other pages.
Right.
And it goes back to that value of hospitality, or at least customer service. If you actually get somebody in 2026 to come into your store, which can be hard, there's a million things competing for your attention. Everybody's too busy. There's not enough time to do all of the things that you need to do in a day. So if you actually get them into the store, you have an opportunity to wow them, create a memory through customer service, through hospitality, that again can lead to that stronger affinity.
Which is different than, I think, Deanne and Josh as well. I think it's city trends, where there's a treasure hunt going on,
right?
And you have to find things in the store, or your goal is to be able to find things.
Yeah. Well, and people like discovery, right?
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Claire's. When we were working with them, they had tried to alter or evolve their store design a few times throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And each time that they did that, it was often, relative to the time, trying to become a little bit more modern. A big, nice table in the front of the store that was minimally merchandised, bringing in fixtures that wasn't the classic Claire's slat wall, and started to organize product in a certain way. And each time that they did that, they found very clear dissatisfaction, or you might even say rebellion, from their core consumers, who said, this isn't what we like this brand for. We want the discovery.
Right. Know your customer.
Well, yeah, know your customer, and also it's the, all too you saying, if you can't be everything to everyone, right? You have to have a clear point of view and stand for something, which again gets back to that importance of creating a clear brand and having clear values. And then that gives you a framework from which to focus on, either from the products or services you're offering, or in my world, how you design a store and the experience and what should make it in and what should not make it in terms of what's inside of that store.
Generations now today shop very differently. Gen Z and Gen Alpha especially have extremely different takes on how they approach shopping than a millennial or Gen X. And so there's quite a different mindset for a physical store there. Are you experiencing any challenges in designing a store? Obviously, you can't design for everyone. Is there a happy middle ground to try to marry those different generational mindsets up in satisfying those different kinds of experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right, you can't design for every single use case, right? But often brands are doing some of that work, kind of for us prior, in that they're trying to be really specific about what it is that they're offering and who it's for.
Right.
And so I don't think you're ever going to be designing for every single age group and the nuance within that. But one way that we like to think about it is, if you think about the edge cases of your customers, so edge cases could be by what they're interested in. It could be age group. It could be lots of different things. But you brought up Aeromexico, and something that we did an extensive experience strategy engagement with them. And one of the things that we thought about was, what are the edge cases of people interacting with your brand at the airport? So it's elderly people, to your point,
Right.
really young people that might be traveling alone, someone in a wheelchair, right? You start to think of 4 or 5 edge cases. And if you design a great customer experience for those edges, everybody else in the middle is going to also have a great time. They're going to enjoy themselves because
Right.
you've thought about the situations that are going to push and pull your offering as far as it possibly can be. And then so your average customer, your average person is for sure going to have their needs met. And I think when you think about that in a retail environment, it's another really helpful framework to say what our edge case is. Probably different than what I just articulated. But if you have someone who qualifies as Gen Alpha, who maybe has discovered your brand online and done a lot of shopping, and they're coming in just for that community aspect, or coming in just because of that product launch, versus a millennial, which is myself, who maybe has a million questions they want to ask the associate because they need more information, didn't trust the thing they saw online. Both of those experiences have to be great within the store. And so it's, how do you orchestrate all of that, or choreograph all of that happening within the same space?
But here's a big question as it's mind. What are people asking for today? Like when you're going into, you meet with Claire's, you meet with what's the request? Like what is I'm sure there's a lot of requests, but like what's the most notable requests that you're receiving?
It's a great question. I mean, it's really different based on different brands and their core customers, right? Luxury fashion brand is going to have a different sort of average mindset than Claire's, for sure. Mm-hmm. But I think the through line is people are looking for a very considered experience relative to that brand. So again, whether it's super high end of the market or middle tier, maybe lower, it has to be really considered and differentiated, not just from their online platform, but differentiated in, a world that is so saturated with different experiences broadly competing for your attention. And so I think people know, consumers are always smarter than we think, and they know right away when something hasn't been considered, whether it's because of the product mix, the design of the store, the space in which they're walking into, the customer service they're getting. And so I think all of our retail work, all of our retail design work is not starting from look and feel. It's not starting from a place of what's beautiful. It's starting from a place of, who are we designing this space for, and what are their needs? What are their expectations, to your question? And so if you think about, some of our, I would say, upper middle market clients in lots of different industries, these are people that are expecting to have what I would say a sort of like hotel level hospitality experience when they're purchasing a pair of shoes, or when they're purchasing a mattress, or when they're purchasing a car. And so I think that's really the biggest thing that we're seeing. Kind of, I know it's the theme of this conversation, so I'm not just taking the easy way out, but really hospitality being first and foremost a part of every experience within those stores. And so I think what's interesting is how that starts to affect, like I said, things like the operational model. Whereas before you might have been able to get away with a sales associate who just said, do you have what you need? Do you want a different size? Where's your credit card?
Right.
Those people now have to be potentially giving you a cappuccino, certainly giving you water, asking what your name is and remembering you when you come back into the store, figuring out really thoughtful ways to elevate that experience. And that's happening. I think what's interesting now is that's happening across lots of different tiers of the market. That's not just the upper end of luxury experience. And I think that's because we're so used to lots of parts of our lives not being filled with hospitality, not being human to human interaction. So I think we're sort of saying, if I'm going to do it, it better be really great.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. Insightful about working from the edges to make sure that they're served and not excluded, and that the middle will automatically be a part of it. They'll be served well.
Here's another quick question. In your experience, and just in terms of Gensler itself, is there a time frame by which they view from a luxury or from a mass of how long the store layout, the store footprint will last?
So I think traditionally the answer was 5 to 7 years. Every 5 to 7 years-ish, retail stores tended to redesign, refresh, upgrade. In my opinion, it is now much shorter. And I think that shortness is being built into the design, in that store design is so much more flexible today than it was before. You probably have a core portion of the design in the physical space that is permanent in some nature, but then you're permanently designing in areas that can be flexible throughout the lifetime of that store and receive interesting installations or completely different product assortments, or like I said, different experiences. It turns into an event, it turns into a seminar, it turns into something completely different than just your traditional store. And so I think those store designs are both changing more frequently and almost lasting longer, in that they have to have this kind of like foundation of flexibility built within them. So that core of it is always there. But if you think about, there's a store in Soho, the On Running store, it's different almost every couple of weeks that you walk by way of visual merchandising or installations. But the store is still, kind of that main framework is still there. And I think that is more and more common now. And it's related to people's attention spans, right? People want something new and fresh and different quicker and quicker and quicker. So you just can't have the same store for 5 to 7 years. Or if you do, I think there's much less focus on the overall design of that store, and it's much more about the service and the product. And the service is consistent, but the product is changing.
So if you mind me asking, because I really want to know, this is the giddy little kid question. What's the 1 or 2 examples of things that you got were so beyond like the outlandish stuff, like putting a Ferris wheel inside of a Toys R Us in Times Square? Like, what was the one request you're like, holy crap, I wish I was an 8-year-old or 6-year-old and I could do this again?
I'm trying to think. I mean, the thing that comes to mind is we have an amazing partnership with Mars and M&M's right now, and we just designed and opened a store in Shanghai and are doing some other work with them as well. And that brand at its core is just fun. Their tagline is more fun together, and I think the way in which they think about their stores is evident. It sort of resonates with this entire conversation. But it's how do we design really nuanced experiences and physical design that reflects that brand value, and then can communicate that to the people in the store, because most often you're buying M&Ms not from their store. It's from a convenience store, or, I suppose maybe online, but they only have, a handful of stores, and they're really special. And I think that's been a really fun process, is to work with that team and understand how do we translate this really special, beloved brand into these fun, different, unique pieces within a retail environment. So that's been a fun one for sure. Whether it's, the characters of the M&Ms showing up in person, or each of them having a unique personality, and that means that they show up in the store a little bit differently. That's been pretty fun.
Yeah, I just came back from License Expo, and all of the M&M characters were there actually walking.
Oh, that's funny.
So it was really.
They have a flagship store in Vegas.
Yeah, really interesting to see how brands are. And this is a question for retail design and whether they're digitally native and doing pop-ups for activation or temporary retail. Could you speak to that area as a perhaps preface to or test for building out, how Gensler looks at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it, right? The cost to enter the physical retail market has become prohibitive for so many brands.
Yeah.
And not just prohibitive, but also risky.
Yeah.
In the sense that the economy is changing so frequently. What people want and what they like, and certainly what they're going to purchase, is changing really quickly. So kind of back to the previous question of stores designs lasting 5 to 7 years, maybe signing a 10-year lease. Yeah. That's a really big decision, and it's a really big commitment, especially if you're a digital first brand that's never done it before. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's an amazing way to test how that brand might show up in the physical world, what the experience should be, and if the consumers like it. And I think it also allows, because it's for a shorter time period, it's a smaller capital investment up front, it allows for more risks to be taken, which I think is
it allows for brand collaborations too, which are interesting possibilities, I think, or hospitality and brand collaborations.
Yeah, that's right. And those collaborations are yet another example of a digital brand showing up differently than it does online. You see lots of the most successful collaborations are the ones that you weren't expecting. It's the liquor brand collaborating with the jean brand, and you sort of say, wait, why? And then there's a story there.
It was all
or at least when it's done well, there's a story there.
How much do pop-ups go into your thought process, like as you're designing these? Like, I remember one of the greatest pop-ups ever, which worked really well, was Scott's. Took over like ESPN Zone or whatever in Times Square and opened up a place where people could go to the bathroom during Christmas, during the holiday season, right? And worked wonders. They were basically all you had to do. You didn't get free toilet tissue, at least I don't think. But it was a pop-up, and people asked about it years later, even though they had stopped doing it for like 10 years.
Exactly
ask about it.
Yeah, Charmin or Kellogg's.
Right. It was. I think it was Scott's. It could have been Charmin. I actually don't remember exactly what, but. How much does pop-ups come into the equation? How much do you, like when you're thinking about this and your team is thinking about, do you actually open a store, or do you say, you know what, let's do a store within a store like a Louis Vuitton used to do at Blooming Hills? Or do we do a pop-up as sort of a, like the metaphorical dip your toe in the water without actually committing to a 15-year lease or a 20-year lease or a 30-year lease, which is, to your point, Tyler, it can sink a brand.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, we're most often designing permanent environments.
Yeah,
we have done some pop-up work or experiential work, and me with my marketing background, I would love to do more of it. Like I said, I think it provides an opportunity or a canvas for some of the most creative thinking because the stakes are a little bit lower. Because it's temporary, and the cost can be a little bit lower in terms of designing and producing and implementing those ideas. But I think that it's an amazing opportunity for brands to experiment more, to create excitement and buzz, whether it's because they're trying to enter a new market or read the results of entering a new market. Was this received well? Does there actually seem to be a perceived need there? So I think it's a really great tool for brands to do something a little bit different, but also gain really valuable insights.
Yeah, it's also a way to build some track record and for some company like Gensler to pitch perhaps a smaller brand and start that way with a vision of where it can take it.
One last question, because speaking of tools, I just wondered, does Gensler have any specific digital tools, spatial analysis tools that you use on your customers' behalf to really inform your design that are unique to you? Because I think your designs really kind of dial into your customer needs pretty effectively and pretty quickly. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I think one of the amazing things about Gensler is we are passionate about evolving and trying new things and really pushing our practice. And so over the years generally, but certainly in the last few years, we've really intentionally put a lot of energy and attention into how we might be able to leverage lots of different new technologies and softwares to make our design better and make our design work more impactful, whether it's for the people using those spaces, the communities around them, certainly our clients. And so, yeah, we have several tools that we use often that are helping us to more quickly evaluate decisions, evaluate spaces, and I think evaluate the effect of those decisions. Does this make something more efficient from a spatial perspective? Does this potentially make different decisions affect each other in different ways when you start to run different modeling on spatial layouts and analysis? In terms of the retail world, there's lots of interesting tools now that can look at portfolios in a really different way quickly. What are the through lines in your retail portfolio when you start to get to scale? Where are spaces working really well and where are spaces maybe not working so well? And what types of spaces should you be looking for, based on looking backwards to look forward? So it's a really interesting time.
It is. And we haven't talked about AI at all on this episode. Yay.
My gosh. It's everywhere all the time, every day.
Yeah, it can be a very powerful tool.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much, Tyler.
Yeah.
So glad to have met you at the
Yeah, me as well. And thank you for inviting me on. This was fun.
A pleasure. Thanks.